risk this may present. I'm wearing my Godzilla socks. A couple months back, my girlfriend went to Walmart, and for some reason, which I do not remember, and I probably wouldn't have remembered 5 minutes after she told it to me, she just randomly found Godzilla socks, like a package of them, at Walmart, and she bought them for me. And I was like, this is how I know it's real. Women like her do in fact exist. Do not give up hope, my humble viewers, all 5 of you. We are all going to make it. WAGMI. Also on unrelated news, my Godzilla -1 figure came about a month ago. I just haven't recorded any videos showing it off yet, but I have minus Goji. I really like the harsh blues on this figure, and his eyes are lit up if you can't tell. Like I said in my Godzilla design shedding tears video, I didn't realize how much I was gonna love minus Goji's design. The only part of it that looks kind of weird, and I don't know if this is just the figure, but like the right foot, I don't know, I just feel like the toes are just separated a little bit too much. You can't see it, but I have him back there on the shelf on my desk where I record these videos. He's sitting underneath the halo of the desk lamp. It's been a little bit of time since I got this one, but my girlfriend got this for me for, I think, my birthday. It's like the Transforming Armored 2024 Godzilla. Originally, we didn't have the armor pieces kind of flayed out, but I've been kicking around ideas for a video, which may or may not come to pass at this point, considering I had like 2 pseudo sort of kind of interviews this week. In brief, I'll just say, very rarely does a day go by where I do not think, man, I could probably do another Godzilla Save the Earth Melee video where I talk about skins. But that's not the topic of today's video. Today is an Idearena video, and I'm going to try to be a little bit vague because I think this video might come out later in my schedule than some of the videos that I obviously haven't even filmed yet, so please excuse the Catboy Cardi Godzilla girl cosplay. I'm trying to locate an image here. Yeah, this particular image. So, a topic that I routinely see discussed in regards to Godzilla video games is the concept of the story mode. And I'll just open up with this and say that I think people who hope for like a really in-depth, engaging story within a Godzilla video game product are really just kidding themselves. Toho Company Limited charges out the wazoo for the licensing rights to the various Godzilla monsters, and thus a substantial portion of the budget provided by a publisher for the development of a Godzilla game usually means that the story is pathetic is too mean of a word. Minimalistic. Yes, that's the word. Most of the time, the story is pretty minimalistic. Most people say, oh, I want a open world Godzilla game with like a branching story and in-depth exploration of the kaiju / the titans for the people that live in Monsterverse rules land. So I'm sure you're wondering what could be done with a Godzilla video game story given those limitations. And I'm sure another portion of the audience is wondering why I plopped a picture of Dragon Ball Z Budokai Tenkaichi 1 up on the screen. So just to kick off this particular segment, I never watched Dragon Ball Z growing up. My first exposure to the Dragon Ball Z stories and characters was Dragon Ball Z Budokai Tenkaichi. And I feel like we're going to enter the Twilight Zone for a second here. I loved Sonic the Hedgehog growing up, and as a youngster, much like all young kids do, I got massively incensed whenever I read online that Goku could defeat Sonic the Hedgehog. Yes, I was that kid who would emotionally respond rather viscerally whenever I was told that Mario could beat up Sonic. So I was never really interested in Dragon Ball Z, but McCloud Gaming added Goku and several of the other shonen anime protagonist characters to Super Smash Flash 2, probably the most infamous Super Smash Bros. Fan game. And to be fair, I tried Goku out in it, and I was like, oh wow, okay, Goku's not terrible. I started to gain an appreciation for Dragon Ball, and sometime after after that, GameStop started dumping all of their used PlayStation 2 discs, you know, doing a sort of flash sale, like buy one, get one free. I think it was like buy two, get one free, actually. And the one that was close to where I lived with my mother and brother and father had one of these sales, and it was nearby the Walmart. So we went in there one week, and I think I got like one or two games that I actually really wanted to buy, but I couldn't figure out what to use that third free game on. And I saw Super Saiyan Goku on the cover of Budokai Tenkaichi, so that ended up being the one that I got. And if you have seen my Godzilla in anime video, you know that that kind of ended up plunging me down the rabbit hole that is anime as a medium in general. But to avoid getting too off track, in the process of playing and 100%ing Dragon Ball Z Budokai Tenkaichi 1, through the story mode, I learned basically the Cliff Notes version of the Dragon Ball Z storyline. And so I've always looked upon it rather favorably as a result. I know a lot of people rightfully clown on Dragon Ball Z Budokai Tenkaichi 1. Up until a couple weeks ago, the most recent one was obviously Dragon Ball Z Budokai Tenkaichi 3. You're seeing this in the future, and I am recording this in the past, and Dragon Ball Z Sparking Zero came out like a week or two ago. Moist Critical and Asmongold have both done videos on it. I believe I saw Video Game Donkey did a video on it. So it's kind of fresh in my mindscape as a result of that. So let's circle back. I want to talk about how I would do a Godzilla video game story mode. If you have watched this channel for any length of time, you know that I am a huge proponent of the Godzilla Save the Earth and Godzilla Destroy All Monsters Melee kind of style of Godzilla video game. In fact, the video is now deleted because I got pretty aggravated in the process of filming this, but I live streamed Godzilla Destroy All Monsters Melee for about an hour earlier today. I got way too frustrated dealing with it, and I will leave it at that, but it kind of put me in a mood to talk about Godzilla, you know, the thing that I love most in terms of fictional characters and franchises. So I would like to propose the following solution to the Godzilla video game story conundrum. I don't think it would require a whole lot of intensive financial resources to be developed, because the Dragon Ball games have kind of shown that you can kind of just do the story of the thing in question, and it provides a decent chunk of content. As I just said, with my experience with Budokai Tenkaichi, it kind of introduces new fans to the material they have not experienced yet. I just think that the Budokai Tenkaichi way of handling the story structure is the way to go. For the most part, a Budokai Tenkaichi style story would basically just reiterate the Godzilla stories that have already transpired in the existing Godzilla media that we have, but it kind of makes it into a sort of like classic mode Super Smash Brothers, Sonic Riders mission mode style ordeal. Why is it that every single time I sit down to record a video, I get some generic notification on my phone? Anyway, in addition to the kind of retreading story ground, though, in the Dragon Ball Z Budokai Tenkaichi games, there were usually a handful or more of kind of what-if scenarios, which weren't, you know, tremendously creative, but it was a way of having unique, original new story beats without having to invest a ton of money and time into developing a fully blown new storyline. So that's what I see as the kind of benefit of that kind of story mode structure. Real briefly, I'm going to kind of summarize my feelings about the story modes of the Atari Pipeworks trilogy Godzilla games in general. Destroy All Monsters Melee didn't really even have a story, so we can kind of just blow past that. My biggest comment on that is basically that it sort of mocks the kind of Showa-esque aliens invade and take over monsters storyline, but it's not really worth talking about. Although, I will say, slight tangent, I wonder what happened to the commander guy, like canonically within the story, from Destroy All Monsters Melee. Because we know Queen Vorticia replaced him in Save the Earth and Unleashed. So what happened to that guy from the first game? He was a Vortok. Anyway, I think the Atari Pipeworks trilogy, at least starting with Godzilla Save the Earth, really shows the weakness of trying to do a sort of grandiose, bombastic story campaign for a Godzilla video game. There is the kind of route that I already stated, which is that they dump so much money into trying to develop a solid story mode that the rest of the game kind of suffers as a result. But, and I think this was more so the case with the Atari Pipeworks game trilogy, publishers of video games for some reason seem to really get cold feet with regards to the Godzilla property. So, though they may plan for a big bombastic story mode, most of the time, and by most of the time I mean in the cases of Godzilla Save the Earth and the case of Godzilla Unleashed, the game gets rushed from here to hell and back, and then we're left with like a half-baked, no, that's not strong enough, a quarter-baked story that you can see the kind of aftershock rumblings of something great with, but the final product just doesn't live up to the hype or the anticipation that the developers maybe hoped you would have for it. People always talk about, you know, having cutscenes and dialogue and characters, and it's like, bro, they're gonna waste so much money on even being able to say that Godzilla is in the game, and especially if they do what Godzilla fans probably want, which is have more than one Toho monster in the game, they're not gonna have the budget for that. So I personally think that the sort of Budokai Tenkaichi story campaign style is the way to go, and for the record, no, I am not talking about Sparking Zero specifically here. I haven't played that game, but from what I understand, the campaign has gotten a little bit of flack, and I'm not talking about the grade 8 Vegeta difficulty, I just mean it's kind of lazy, which I guess you could say is true in general of the Budokai Tenkaichi / Sparking series in general, and I will say, having rewatched many of the cutscenes from Budokai Tenkaichi 1, I understand where that complaint comes from, but we also have to be pragmatic here, and at least in a Godzilla context, you know, Godzilla monsters don't really talk with the exception of, you know, Godzilla vs. Gigan's English dub. I personally think the best way to go would basically to be have a kind of brief summarization read by someone who is playing like an unseen G-Force operator, or maybe we could have the PS4 G-Force operator come back, or we could have Operator Yui come back. In either case, basically just have that character kind of narrate and set the stage for whatever conflict / mission the player is about to embark upon in a styling similar to the SCP article videos by The Volgan.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Miller, and the SCP we're going to be looking at today,
which I highly recommend, by the way. The Volgan is in no way associated with this channel, but I really like that SCP content. That's kind of what I would do. And then at most, maybe after that, I would have like a camera looking out the side of a helicopter, you know, maybe with like the door open. Kind of similar to the reporter guys that show up in GMK during / prior to the Godzilla versus Baragon fight.
The red monster has suddenly disappeared underground. Godzilla's looking around. He doesn't seem to understand where his enemy's gone. Godzilla's kicking the red monster in the gravel pits. Looks like the red monster's in big trouble.
Ugh, it's terrible. I don't want to watch it.
Shut up!
And maybe just have some unseen character narrate and kind of tell us what just happened. Like, Orga just broke through the barrier and is heading directly towards Godzilla or something like that. But I think the most important thing is, like I said, I think the best way to go would basically be to retell the different eras of Godzilla through a sort of Tenkaichi-esque story. Budokai Tenkaichi separated the story, as best as I can remember, into into like the Saiyan saga, the Namek saga, the Frieza saga, the Android saga, the Cell saga, the Fusion saga, and the Boo saga / sagas. I know there were a lot of moving parts in that whole thing. That was why I started watching Dragon Ball Z in Season 9, because that was my favorite part of Budokai Tenkaichi 1's story. So don't try to tell me this would not be an effective way to get people into the franchise, because I have lived it. I know. But with Godzilla, you could kind of structure it similarly, but obviously differently. Before I really break it down,
I'm gonna break it down.
Let it be broke.
Can you dig it?
It's done.
I would personally skip over the original Gojira, obviously considering there were no other monsters for Godzilla to fight in that movie. So my dream Godzilla game is obviously a kind of Godzilla 3D arena fighter sort of thing. A 3D fighter game. Godzilla Saved the Earth Melee, but officially released. I know Godzilla for PS4 did the kind of like tutorial level with the Heisei Godzilla basically carrying out the equivalent of Gojira's story for like, what, 2 minutes tops. I just think that the Showa era kind of has enough content in it to fill up a story mode similar to the Budokai Tenkaichi series. Raids Again, there's at least one fight with Anguirus. I haven't watched Raids Again in a while, so there may be 2 separate fights. I know there's the fight on the island at the beginning of the movie, but I don't think we saw that fight completely. And then I know there's the fight in Osaka later in the movie, but that's at least one. If King Kong gets into the game in any way, I guess that's 2, because you can do at least one King Kong versus Godzilla fight. Then you can do at least 2 different fights for Mothra versus Godzilla, because you can have Godzilla versus the adult Showa Mothra, and you can also have 2 larvas versus Showa Godzilla. I haven't watched Ghidorah in a while, but there's at least one fight in there between Mothra, Rodan, and Godzilla against Ghidorah. Invasion of Astro Monster, I believe you can get like 2 out of that, because there's the Planet X fight between Rodan, Godzilla, and King Ghidorah, and then I believe there was a fight later in the movie too. Can you guys tell I haven't watched those movies in a while? Godzilla versus the Sea Monster, there's at least 1 or 2 fights with Ebirah. I'm trying not to count fights between monsters that happen multiple times in the same movie, because I feel like that would get really boring and repetitive as a Godzilla story mode. Then there's Godzilla, Anguirus, and Gorosaurus versus King Ghidorah from Destroy All Monsters. Then there's Godzilla and Minya versus Gabara. Again, I'd probably just condense the Godzilla versus Hedra fights down to like a single fight on Mount Fuji at night. Godzilla versus Gigan, there's a Gigan King Ghidorah versus Godzilla and Anguirus fight. Godzilla versus Megalon, you can have Jet Jaguar versus Gigan and Megalon, as well as Jet Jaguar and Godzilla versus Gigan and Megalon. You can have Godzilla versus Fake Godzilla, which could always be like an alternative skin for the Showa Godzilla, so it'd basically be a mirror match within the story. And then obviously Godzilla and King Caesar versus Showa Mechagodzilla. And then I think there's like 2 fights that you can do in Terror of Mechagodzilla, because there's Godzilla versus Titanosaurus and Godzilla versus Titanosaurus and Mechagodzilla. So just out of the Showa era alone, you have like 15 different levels minimum. And then I don't even know how many fights there are or how many episodes Godzilla monsters showed up in Zone Fighter. So if you add Zone Fighter to the roster of this imaginary game, you have a handful more of potential story mode missions to do. Then you basically have the whole Heisei series, and you can do a bunch of levels based off of the Millennium movies, especially because I know, Final Wars has a billion fights in it. GMK has at least 4 or 5 fights that you can do. Say hello to Remy, everybody. Remers. Plus, there's the Monsterverse, which, if you include enough playable monsters from the Monsterverse, that's a ton of content right there. You've got, 4, 5, maybe 6 or more fights that you could recreate within the game itself. And you might be saying to yourself, well, that's probably a very, very boring story. That's just a bunch of fights between particular opponents. And to that I say, I actually think you could diversify the gameplay a little little bit. I personally think that the gameplay loop and combat within the Atari Pipeworks Godzilla fighting games is strong enough on its own to carry a story mode on its own. So I feel like with these kind of concepts that I have here, I think there's enough differentiation. You could do timed battles, like imagine a Burning Godzilla versus Final Form Destroya battle mission where you have to beat Destroya within a limited time. Obviously, as a reference to the fact that Godzilla has like a meltdown timer. You could have a mission where, for example, you protect another monster while trying to defeat another monster. So I have two examples for that. The first is imagine a mission where you have to play as Showa Godzilla and defeat Gabara, but Minya is a monster that is present in that fight, and in order to successfully complete the mission, you have to defeat Gabara while keeping Minya alive, or above a certain health amount. I really don't have an uber specific kind of idea, but I think you kind of get what I'm getting at there. There's a way to do that mission, but you could also do that with GMK. You could have 2001 King Ghidorah versus Godzilla, and you could have to protect the 2001 skin Mothra, kind of similar to how it was done in the movie. Obviously, Godzilla versus Baragon in that specific movie's case would just be a death match, but you could just have, you know, a current objective, survive kind of mission. I don't know, Godzilla Final Wars, Monster X versus 2004 Godzilla. It's basically impossible to beat the boss, so you just kind of have to outlast him and just survive long enough. Again, these are just ideas. I don't have anything like hardcore locked down for most of this stuff. Oh, super powerful final boss characters. The first one that actually canonically transpired, I feel, would be a sort of Showa King Ghidorah, Destroy All Monsters, Godzilla, Anguirus, and Gorosaurus versus King Ghidorah boss battle. Basically make the Showa King Ghidorah really difficult to defeat and practically impossible to defeat on your own, but with the presence of the two other monsters, you're able to kind of team up with the computers to whittle the boss down. But I hear the people screaming in the background, I want an original Godzilla story. I'm delusional. I think we should get completely original Godzilla content, and this would not allow any of that. And to those people, I say the following two things. Firstly, I spit on that general concept. Secondly, much like in Dragon Ball Z Budokai Tenkaichi 1 and its sequels, you could do what-if battles. So not everything would have to be 100% retreaded ground. I was just talking about doing a boss battle with Showa King Ghidorah that requires multiple monsters to successfully defeat, one of which is the player and the others which are computer controlled. But like, imagine the anime trilogy Anagogi scaled up to like massive height and like 3 monsters teaming up to take down the anime Godzilla. Obviously it couldn't be a one-to-one recreation of the anime film's plots because Planet of Monsters didn't really have a monster versus monster conflict, and City on the Edge of Battle only had Mechagodzilla City. I guess technically if the anime Mechagodzilla is a playable character or a skin for one of the various playable Mechagodzillas, then I guess that could be a canonical story mission, I guess. But I had some general ideas for what-if scenarios. Technically, Destroy All Monsters took place in the year 1999. So what about a what-if scenario mission path where you play as the Showa Godzilla versus all of the Heisei monsters? Biollante, Super Mechagodzilla, Space Godzilla, and Destroya. Obviously, it would not end with a meltdown fight, but you could probably find some way to do a what-if scenario about that. That would be kind of fun. I haven't really thought about this one too hard, but what about a what-if set of story mode missions that focus around a world where the Futurians were actually capable of erasing Godzilla from the timeline? So what if there was like a set of Heisei what-if story missions where, I don't know, maybe Anguirus could show up, or maybe Mothra could come back, or whatever, and and they could fight the Heisei monsters. I don't know. What about a set of what-if missions where you play as specifically the skin of Orga that represents the kind of partially transformed Orga from Godzilla 2000, and you have partially transformed Orga fight other monsters? Obviously, Godzilla 2000 was a kind of one-shot in terms of story and continuity, but that's an idea. What about a Millennium what-if where Godzilla never comes back in the Kiryu / Against Mechagodzilla / Tokyo SOS timeline, and you have to like fight as Kiryu in multiple missions involving monsters that never actually showed up in those movies? Obviously, in my personal dream world, there would also be a sort of Atari Pipeworks storyline set of missions where you do like Godzilla Destroy All Monsters Melee's story into Godzilla Save the Earth's story into an adaptation of Godzilla Unleashed story. And the thing is, you could probably take some liberties with that because you could do like stuff mixed between Double Smash and the console versions of Godzilla Unleashed. Anyone who has watched my terrifying terraforming video and several of my other writing revisited videos knows that I personally would probably try to expand the Atari Pipeworks games story arcs into their own thing. Oh, I almost forgot. The Monsterverse. You could always have, you know, the hypothetical what if the Monsterverse Godzilla met the Toho Godzilla. You could have what if Toho Godzilla went through the events of the Monsterverse and vice versa. My point in saying all of this is that you don't have to necessarily make the game a branching paths, intricate, free-roaming world, hyper-complex Godzilla story to make an engaging and fun Godzilla story mode. I know with Dragon Ball, I think a lot of Dragon Ball fans have really gotten sick and tired of seeing the same Dragon Ball stories told over and over and over again, but we haven't really gotten that for the Godzilla franchise. And not only is the kind of budgetary incentive there for this, I would also like to bring up, because I just thought about it, from what I understand, it is very difficult to get physical copies of many of the Godzilla DVDs, Blu-rays, and VHS tapes. I'm lucky, as you guys saw in my Godzilla film tier list video, that I own most of the series on physical media. But a lot of fans, especially the younger ones who were unfortunate enough to have been born in an era where corporations think they are fooling anybody by restricting access strictly to streaming platforms, it would probably be a good way for those fans to experience the stories in a way that isn't, you know, reading Wikizilla articles. I know I really love that website, but reading Wikipedia summarizations of the plots of those movies isn't really the same as watching them, and playing a video game version of them isn't the same as watching them. But like I said, I got into Dragon Ball Z through the story mode for Budokai Tenkaichi 1, so maybe a Godzilla video game story mode could accomplish the same thing in a slightly different fashion. I just think that that's food for thought, and I don't know how many other people have publicly voiced this opinion. When I was in my teenage years and I was more aggressively involved in the Godzilla video game discussions on Toho Kingdom, or was aggressively involved in the discussions on the Colossal Kaiju Combat Sunstone Games forums, most Godzilla fans and Kaiju fans in general, I would suppose, are either immature and just do not understand the kind of realistic restrictions on the franchise that they love, or they legitimately just are delusional and think that their dream ideas will come true someday. I try to keep a little bit more of a level head in that regard. Maybe I'm just cynical and pessimistic. But as I always tell my mother, realism appears as pessimism to someone with an insufficient understanding of the facts.
Just the facts, ma'am.
Anyway, that about does it for today. Do you guys wish to see some of the video ideas I have that are written down in this notebook?
Too bad.
Things have been a little bit discombobulated here around the house as of recently, during a time that I will not specify to you, considering how far in the past it is. But I am going to try to at least get uploads through to the 1-year anniversary of my covering of the Godzilla 2000 and Orga Godzilla Save the Earth Melee presentation video. You guys take it easy. I hope this video's viewership does not crater completely like the video that just came out this week. So, in order to prevent that and to make Remy here rather happy, leave a like, drop a comment telling me what you think of any of the various things that I have said across this video. Subscribe if you wish to get videos from me in your Subbox subscription feed in the future, but like to live dangerously and not know for sure whether or not that will happen. And until next time, guys, I will catch you on the flip side.
But I tell you what I'm gonna do. You hear me? I'm gonna go over there and get them Koreans some more of my money.